Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on a positive approach to leadership and coaching. My name's Jean Balfour, Managing Director of Bailey Balfour and also Program Director of our ICF Accredited Coach Certification Program. I'd like to welcome you to join us here today and welcome to GoToWebinar. So before I move on, I just want to share with you a couple of ways that you can interact with me today. The first is that we'll do a couple of polls, and that's an opportunity for you to engage with me. But also, if you have a look on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a box that's marked questions. Please do feel free to ask questions throughout. I will also pause at any point for you to ask questions. So it's wonderful today. We have people joining us from all around the world. Happy to see people from as far away as the UK, that's very early in the UK, through to Australia, near the end of Friday in Australia. So you're very welcome wherever you are. For me here in Singapore, it's lunchtime. So I think for many of you, it is the lunch hour. To just introduce a little bit about who we are. So as I've said, we're an ICF accredited coach certification provider. We have a ACC level accredited program, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar. We also provide coaching skills for leaders, and these are workshops either in the classroom or using Zoom, which is our video conference platform. And then we provide executive coaching, both for leaders in a face-to-face setting, but also using a virtual environment. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a few different concepts related to taking a positive approach to leadership. I'm really curious about how can we lead from a framework that's really empowering and enabling. And today I'm going to introduce you to a few core concepts: appreciative inquiry, a little bit about strengths-based leadership, and also a little bit about solution-focused coaching. And I'm going to weave some examples throughout and hopefully inspire you to be thinking about how can you lead using a positive framework. So let's do our polls to start with. And these are just polls to kind of get us thinking. So you should be able to see a poll now on the screen. And this question is asking you, is intelligence something that you can change or can't change? So if you believe that intelligence is something you can't change very much, then you agree, or disagree if you believe actually that it's possible to change intelligence. And thanks, I can see many of you voting, so I'll just wait a couple of minutes before I share the results of this. Great, let me close the poll and share the results. So you can see that about 2/3 of you, a bit more than 2/3, believe that you can change intelligence, and about 1/3 are saying, no, I'm not sure that you can change intelligence. Let's look at another question. This one is related to talent. Do you believe that you can improve how talented you are at most things? So again, agree or disagree. I'm seeing a lot of you voting there. I'll share the results in a minute. So thank you very much for voting. It's always good to see different people's perspectives. Great. Wow, that's nearly everybody voted. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to close and share. So what you can see is that most people are saying, yes, you can improve how talented you are at most things. So many of you will be familiar with the concept of Carol Dweck's growth mindset. And I wanted to start here because increasingly for me, I see this underpinning so much of my work, so much of the coaching I do myself, so much of the coaching in the way we teach coaching, but also in the way I work with leaders. And I think the thing about Carol Dweck's concept of a growth mindset is it's almost the ultimate starting point for us to think about positive leadership and strengths-based leadership. So for those of you who are new to her research, she looked at these two different constructs. One was the idea that we might have a fixed mindset, which is where we view ourselves as having a talent or any type of talent or indeed intelligence, that we either possess it or we lack it. or she saw the other side of the context, which is believing that it's possible for us to strive and learn and develop new skills. In her research, what she found was that, in fact, most things were able to be developed. We also know from neuroscience and the concept of neuroplasticity that, in fact, we can grow our brains. I grew up with the concept that my brain would sort of stop developing by the time I was about 25, and it was all deterioration from there on down. But we in fact now know that our brains can create new neural pathways and in fact grow right up until the end of our days. And this is what she's talking about, a growth mindset, that if we believe and hold that to be true, that we can both become more talented at things and indeed grow our intelligence, and there's good research to show that we can do that too, then that will help us to continue to hold a positive framework and also to learn in our roles and in our organisations. And there's some research that shows that if we hold a growth mindset in organisations, that employees are more likely to trust each other, they feel a stronger sense of ownership to the company, they're more likely, curiously, to say that the company supports risk-taking, because taking a risk is seen as trying something new, trying out ideas with the idea that it's not failure, it's about learning, or it's failing forward, if you like. And finally, that companies foster innovation. So we see that holding this growth mindset, which I believe, as I said, underpins this, is good for organisations. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, let me share a little bit with you about it. So people with a fixed mindset, or when we hold a fixed mindset, we feel that we kind of need to look like we know things. We need to feel like we look smart. We're more likely to avoid challenges because we might be worried about failure. We see effort as pointless because we think, well, either I can do it or I can't. We're a bit frightened of negative criticism because we might feel that it's about us and about our finite set of skills, and we may be less likely to reach our potential. But if we hold a growth mindset, then maybe we're more likely to feel a need to keep learning, to see the effort as a path to learning, to encourage criticism because there's growth in it, and to feel like we can keep moving forward. Now, for me personally, I believe that I've got a growth mindset in some things and a fixed mindset in others, and I'm always on the lookout for those places where I have a fixed mindset. I don't think it's quite as binary as we are one or we are the other. However, I think it's really important to go on a journey when we think about being a positive leader, to being open to thinking about how can I do that? How can I hold a growth mindset for myself? And how can I hold a growth mindset for the people I lead? And that links very closely to strengths-based leadership, because we see that strengths-based leaders are looking like I am for those fixed mindset moments and hoping that we can overcome them and move out of them. They're seeing that we can choose the mindset we have, and they're asking these questions. What can I do differently? How will this help me learn? And being aware that if we don't try, that we'll keep learning. So I want to take that as a kind of underpinning theory and then move on into looking at what are the three different approaches that I think help support this concept of taking a positive approach to leadership. Just bear with me. So I want to start with appreciative inquiry, a concept that was developed by David Cooperrider, who I was lucky enough to spend some time with at Case Western in the US. So what is appreciative inquiry? This is their definition. They say, at its heart, AI, not of course meaning artificial intelligence, is about the search for the best in people, the best in organisations, and the strengths-filled, opportunity-rich a world around them. Appreciative inquiry is not so much a shift in the methods and models of organisational change, but it's a fundamental shift in the overall perspective taken throughout the entire change process. It's about seeing the wholeness of the human system and to inquire into that system's strengths, possibilities, and successes. So at its heart, appreciative inquiry is about doing that. It's about looking for what we can appreciate, inquiring into what's possible and hopeful in a situation. And it comes out of this idea that often we approach challenges or difficulties in organisation with old thinking. And as Albert Einstein said, that no problem can be solved by the same thinking which created it. We must learn to see the world anew. And appreciative inquiry is inviting us to think and look in a very positive and strengths-based way at what's already working. So I want to share with you a few of the underpinning principles and the kind of rationale behind what created appreciative inquiry. And the starting point for this is that our images of the future drive our action. So if we hold a positive and appreciative image of the future, then that's going to drive action differently than if we hold a problem-focused or a negative approach. We also see that when we have positive images, they lead in turn to positive action. And there's three things I want to share with you to demonstrate this. There are, of course, many, but three examples that are familiar for me. The first is the Pygmalion effect. I started my career as a primary school teacher, and this was something that we were taught about in Teachers College, and I really took this to heart. And that's that the performance of children often depends on the view of the teacher about those children. So if I hold that all children are capable of growth and learning, take a growth mindset, then it's more likely that those children will come into the classroom, into the educational setting, and also hold a growth mindset. I was very careful not to listen to the teachers who'd had children before me tell me what they thought about those children, because I knew about the Pygmalion effect. That would affect how I treated them. But it was really important that I held a belief that all children are capable of growth and learning and not be affected by other people's perceptions. The other place we see it is in the sports arena. So many of you will know that visualization has become a big part of sports psychology, and that in fact some of the sports psychologists will say that when they do scans, they can actually see if somebody's visualizing running a race, for example, they can see muscles twitching in the same way and brain movement in the same way as if that person is actually running the race. And so visualizing something actually helps to bring it about. But the final one I want to share is something that's to do with the placebo effect. This is something I've personally got really curious about myself. So this is where we may take a pill, a sugar pill, for example, what we're told that it is going to have an effect, and it has an effect. So there's one very famous study that was looking at knee surgery for people with osteoarthritis in their knees. And they did the study where for some of the people, they actually did the surgery, and for other people, they just did an incision and then they closed it up. They didn't do any surgery. And what they found is that after 24 months, neither group showed any difference in their pain outcomes. So the people who had had no intervention at all said that their pain had improved as much as the people who'd had surgery. And so, in fact, in the UK, that surgery has now been taken off the list because it's deemed to have been just the fact of having surgery impacted the pain. So all of this is saying, really, that if we believe something is possible, then it's more likely that something will come about in that space. So I'm just seeing that there's a question here. So I'm going to come on to just pause for a couple of questions in a minute, but thank you for your question. Keep them coming. So all of these really are about holding a positive framework and seeing that can have an impact on the people around us and on ourselves. And so appreciative inquiry is really all about this. It's a move from advocacy, so telling people what to do, to being curious and inquiring. And it's a move from solving problems, so looking at what's not working and seeing if we can solve that, to appreciating what is working and seeing how that works. So let me go into a bit more detail about how I see this. So we've many of us in organisational change programs taken a problem-solving approach, and I've worked with this on things that go wrong. So where we see failure in events, we do what's called and identify the problem. Then we do a root cause analysis and we look for wherever things went wrong. We analyse that and we develop a treatment plan. Now, I'm not saying per se that that is a wrong approach. In many situations, that's actually the right and best approach to take. But appreciative inquiry takes a different lens to it. So the starting point, instead of looking for the problem, is saying, actually, what do we want the outcome to be? And then beginning to use dialogue and design to begin to create that outcome. So looking for where things are working, looking for what's possible, taking that appreciative approach. And underpinning this are some core assumptions. The first one is that what we focus on becomes our reality. So as I've just said, if we focus on something positive, something optimistic maybe, creative, we're more likely to bring it about. That in every organisation, there's not only problems. Sometimes it feels like that because that's where we put our energy, but things are always working. The organisation is succeeding. We also hold the assumption that people will move to the future when they carry forward things that they know work well about the past. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can do that. And that basically the language we use affects the organisation being observed. So this comes out of anthropologists who knew that when they began to observe different groups, it changed their behaviour. So if I go in to observe something in an organisation, or I'm walking in to have a one-to-one with a colleague and I'm coming in with a growth mindset, a believing that the positive is possible, that's going to have an impact versus me coming in with a problem mindset and believing that we've got problems to be solved. So all of this is about just gently shifting where it's appropriate to taking an appreciative lens. So just to bring this alive a little bit more, we see that an example of this. So I do a lot of work, as you know, in gender inclusion in organisations, and the problem-solving approach is a company that's taking this lens that the culture is too male-dominated, perhaps a bit macho, really looking at the numbers and saying we've got a real problem here, this is a challenge. And so we see underpinning this that we would be talking about there are no women in senior positions, attrition rates of up-and-coming women managers is high. The approach is to look at what's influencing that and work out where it's going wrong. An appreciative inquiry approach is very different. It would be saying, okay, we've got this question. We can see that we don't have gender balance, but what's our ideal? So let's paint a picture of what it is that we would like to bring about. And then we would go and do an inquiry and look for where cross-gender working is working. We would look for teams where there was gender inclusion, and we would do the same level of rigour, but we would then say, how can we replicate what's working there in other bits of the organisation? So instead of looking where it's going wrong and how can we fix it, we say gender inclusion is where we're headed, and let's look for where it's working and see how we can replicate that and move that out across the organisation. So I'm going to come on to a little bit about strengths-based leadership, and we've got a question about strengths-based leadership. What is your view, evaluation of the various strengths assessments? Are these Strengths Finder via character strengths? I don't know that. In the market, is there only one that you particularly like or recommend? Well, I personally use Strengths Finder if I'm working with that. I think it's a good tool. And the thing I like about Strengths Finder, and I'll share a little bit about it in a minute, is that everybody can access it because the book is readily available. So you can take the questionnaire, or you can work with an accredited person who's accredited in the strengths-based approach. So that's the one I use and I see. I personally also hold that taking strengths-based is absolutely right, and it's really important for us to focus on our strengths. And in many ways, we don't need to have a tool. We can do some inquiry with looking at that. So let's talk a bit about strengths-based leadership. So Daniel Clifton, who's the founder of the strength psychology movement in many ways, he says that a leader needs to know their strengths as a carpenter knows their tools, or a physician knows their instruments at her or his disposal. What great leaders have in common is that they each truly know their strengths, and they can call on the right strength at the right time. And this explains why there's no definitive list of characteristics that describe all leaders, because the best leaders know themselves and they know how to play to their strengths and they know where their gaps are and they know how to find others to fill in those. Now, I don't completely hold that doesn't mean that we won't continue to develop and grow. I have a growth mindset. I believe that we can grow in the areas we're less strong. But in our high-pressured workplaces, I think it's good for us to start with strengths because they're going to be the ones that are easier to keep growing and developing. So strengths-based leadership at a very simple level is about focusing on the strengths of ourselves and the individuals we lead and being really curious about those, looking for them, seeing how we can align roles with those people's strengths and helping them understand how to perform at their best. And we do see this happening in some organisations where they've really looked very carefully at not needing a role to be very specific and helping individuals or leaders to say, right, well, these are my strengths. I can do 70% of the role from my strengths, 30% of the role, areas that I'm not so strong at, can we get that down to 20%? And then we find somebody else to do the other 10. This is not us getting out of doing jobs we don't like. There are always going to be bits of our role we don't particularly enjoy, but it is about trying to align roles. Now, of course, this requires a huge flexibility in organisations to do this, but I really hold optimistically that we can increasingly look at ways to do this. And in doing that, I think there are kind of three levels for this. The first is, what are my strengths in myself that are good for me? What are my strengths in leading others? And what are my strengths in leading organisations? And I may also look for those in the people I'm leading and managing. Of course, there's other strengths around this. There's other strengths to do with our technical skills and our knowledge and our capability in our job. So it's about seeking strengths that are going to play into all of those places. And this is just a very practical thing that you can do with the people you work with or with a peer as a peer coaching conversation. You can ask these questions. Since childhood, what have you always loved doing? And the reason we ask that question is often when we're children, things that we play or enjoy making or doing or being tell us something about our kind of innate strengths and the things that we enjoyed. You know, I'm essentially a teacher, and I do remember playing schools when I was very little. You know, I've never stopped, really. Here I am. You could ask the question, tomorrow at work, if you could spend time on anything you wanted, what would it be? That also gives us clues about strengths because we often enjoy most the things that we're most strong at. And asking about peak experiences, when you felt at your best and your most engaged, what was going on for you there? So all of these are about really helping to elicit your strengths, elicit the strengths of another, or if it's a peer coaching, helping to elicit strengths. So I've just touched very lightly there on strengths-based leadership, but as I said, there's plenty of materials for you to find more if you're interested. I want to go on and talk about another aspect of this, and this is solution-focused coaching, which is where we use a coaching approach, either as leaders or managers or as executive coaches, that's focused on looking for solutions rather than problems. So Steve Teshaza, who's a psychotherapist who's widely credited with doing the original work around solution-focused therapy, says this: problem talk creates problems, solution talks create solutions. So we're back on the same theme. Here we are saying that if we seek solutions, we'll find solutions. And underpinning solution-focused coaching are two key principles. The first is that problems are not present all the time. So if I come to have a conversation with you and say, oh, I'm really having a terrible time, I can't stand my boss, it's working really badly, and I think I'm going to leave. Well, the truth is that there are probably moments where that relationship is working okay, and the problem isn't present at that time. And that's a really curious thing because that might help us to look and resolve some things in that moment. The second is having a picture of a destination, a vision, if you like, makes it easier to get there. So again, we're back to creating a positive image of the future. For example, I might say, well, actually, I do want to stay. I want to work this out. So I'm going to imagine what type of relationship I'll have with my boss and look for ways that that's possible to bring it about. So the two key principles are that problems are not present all the time and that having a good picture of the future will help. So what does this mean for leaders? How can you apply solution-focused coaching in your environment? Well, the four key principles are this. Get really clear about the end goal. So what do you want to achieve? Asking people, what is it that we want to achieve? What's going to inspire us to action? Look at what's already working because the problem isn't present all the time. Then looking at what's also worked in the past. What did we do when we had problems like this? How did we solve them? And using affirmation. So acknowledging people when things are going well and looking for those opportunities to say thank you and good job. So I want to just go into a few examples, a little bit more detail about how you could do this. So one of the things that we commonly use in coaching is something called the miracle question, which is available to all leaders and is also used in Appreciative Inquiry. So this is a question where you might start by saying, I'm going to ask you a strange question. After a deep sleep tonight, when you wake up tomorrow morning, suppose a miracle has happened so that your situation is resolved. When you wake up tomorrow morning, what would be different? And how would you know the situation is solved? What would be the sign that a miracle has occurred? So we see when I'm teaching coaching that this question has a really powerful effect. It looks so simple, but actually really inviting somebody to think about their real dream goal can often be very liberating. And we can use this in organizations. We've got a problem. Let's imagine tomorrow it's solved. What would have happened? The second piece is then to look at what's working in the moment. So let's look at our current practice and say, what's working? When is it working? What are the conditions that help it work? And who's helping it work? So what are the pieces that those gentle moments where it does work, what are the pieces in those moments that mean the problem's not existing then? Then we can look at the past and say, well, we've probably had problems similar to this, not the same in the past, which we've sorted out. What did we try and how did we resolve it? What worked? So again, what we're doing here is bringing in energy because we're saying, look, we're capable of solving this. We're holding an image that we are capable of solving this problem because we've done it before, and that creates an energy. We can also look at others in similar situations and say, what did they do and what worked? And finally, we can celebrate little team successes, we can thank people, and we can identify individual contributions. There's some research that suggests that a 5-to-1 ratio of affirmations to criticism is good to encourage that kind of generative activity. So I'm just going to give you an example, pulling together those threads of how this might play out in an organisation. So I'm going to go back to my gender inclusion example. So I think that if we were to talk about gender inclusion in this way, the first thing we might do is create a clear and compelling vision. We might do the miracle question. Some organisations I know have done this with 1,000 people. They've got people to interview each other in pairs and ask that miracle question. What would it look like if we had a gender inclusive organisation? Then we can explore where it's currently working well and what's contributing to this. So here in Asia Pacific, one of the questions that I like to ask is what's going on in your offices in China? Because what we often see is that there's good gender inclusion. There's often equal numbers of men and women in leadership roles in multinational organizations and local organizations in China. So what's bringing that about? That means that the problem doesn't exist everywhere all the time. We've got some successes. Let's learn from them. Let's understand what's happening. Let's look at what we've done that's already worked. So there's a good chance that our gender inclusion has improved in the last 5 years. What were the things that we did that helped that? What were the contributing factors that brought that about? And then let's celebrate small wins and encourage people who are championing this. For example, male allies who are really supporting gender inclusion in their teams and helping women progress in the organisation. So this is just a small example where we can take something that I so often hear described as such a big problem, and we can hold a different lens, a creative, generative, positive lens to the same situation and see what we can bring about. So what does this mean for leaders? So I believe that it means that the language and imagery that we use directly impacts the people we lead. And therefore, it's important for us to choose this wisely, to be really holding a positive, creative, solution-focused lens to the situations we're in. And for me, that means seeking out the strengths in yourself and others, looking for the best of what is and appreciating and celebrating that, creating a compelling vision of the future, and celebrating successes and wins. So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions or comments. We don't have the chat function enabled here, but if you have comments, I'm happy to share them via the question box if you want to do that. Any reflections you have. I won't use people's names, so it's anonymous when you share that. So does anybody have any questions about this concept of taking this positive, strengths-based approach to leadership? So perhaps while we're waiting for that, let me just take a minute to go on and share the final thoughts. So, of course, you know, I am an executive coach and I teach coaching in many different environments. So I believe that coaching conversations are a really key place for us to do this. And so we can choose to do things like explore what's working, identify strengths, look for novel solutions, and provide thanks and appreciation in those environments. So just to end today, I'd like to share a little bit about our coach certification program, which is accredited by the International Coach Federation. Our program is all about coaching at work and in organisations. I lead the program, and I myself have spent all of my life being curious about what makes organisations successful and how can we help people to be happy and successful in the work. And that underpins our coaching program. It's very heavily practice-based because I also believe that we learn to coach by coaching. And so we do loads of practice, get lots of feedback, me included, and that helps us to become skilled and competent coaches, and then we build in different theories and approaches. Our program is online. We use Zoom, so you can dial in from wherever you are. Everybody's on video, and it's very accessible. And our aim, and certainly what we're seeing, is that we are aiming to develop confident, skilled, and competent coaches. So we have students and alumni from all around the world. As far, we've got current programs with students in Sydney and in the UK, and a lot across Asia Pacific and the Middle East. We deliver it in time zones that are flexible for those regions. And if you're interested, the people who have attended are very varied. So we have a mixed group of people who come from the business. We've had people from finance. We've had people from HR, people from marketing, and we've also had people from different levels in the organisation. We've had self-employed people who are coming because it's a part of their practice, and leaders who are coming because they want to be more effective in their leadership. As I've said, it's virtual in our interactive classroom, and we provide all the materials for you in a user login interface so that you can access the PowerPoint presentations, you can get all the handouts and everything from wherever you are. So I've said most of this already. It's really down to say that if you're interested in that, please reach out to one of the team for either joining a preview session or having a call with me or one of my colleagues. We've got a cohort starting in a few weeks and another one starting in June, so you'll be very welcome to join us. And finally, just to say, please, if you're not already on our mailing list, please join, and you can join in our regular webinars. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any other questions. So I'm going to pause there and say thanks for joining today. If you've got any questions now, please do type them into the chat. Otherwise, I wish you a happy weekend.